I don't know where it comes from, but I've always liked deranged art. I started watching South Park when I was 8. I got into horror movies in my early teens, and at the age of 16 I watched the Humancentipede trilogy, and I really liked it. I've been meaning to make a video about these films for ages, and a few days ago I stumbled upon an old Forbes article from Luke Y. Thompson that finally inspired me to do so. You see, the Humancentipede films are very disgusting. So disgusting that it's easy to get the impression that they are just disgusting. I mean, they are centered around people forced to eat feces, so I don't blame anybody for not searching for a deeper meaning in that.
Come. Yeah, come.
But what if there is? What if there's an interesting message hidden between all the shit and violence? I think that is the case. And I know that there's at least one other person, Luke Y. Thompson, who seems to agree with me. And we will get to his alt-right allegory in a bit. First, you need to know that I wouldn't be making this video if there was just the first part. Humancentipede first sequence is, in its core, very similar to the South Park episode that parodied it.
Very well, I will eat the cuttlefish.
3 victims are involuntarily forced into becoming one larger organism by being sewn together anus to mouth. Their perpetrator is a mad surgeon from Germany. That's not a coincidence, by the way, since the movie was inspired by real Nazi experiments. Anyway, besides the Humancentipede itself and the great performance of Dieter Laser, the movie doesn't have much to show for itself. The plot is very simple and straightforward, and in the end, everybody just sort of dies and the credits start to roll. Wait a second, who's that? It's the protagonist of Humancentipede 2? That's right, there's a seamless transition between the first and the second part. That's where things start to get interesting. Personally, I like the second film much more. It's more brutal, more artsy, and it's told from the perspective of an interesting villain, who's a big fan of the first movie and wants to make a Humancentipede himself. For that purpose, he even tracks down one of the original actresses and otherwise kidnaps random civilians from the parking lot he works at.
Oh, that must be Quentin's car.
After a disturbing finale, we find out that he probably didn't actually go through with anything and just imagined it all. The credits start to roll and wait, who are those two guys? Okay, before we talk about the third and final part, I want to say that I think the second movie's most interesting aspect is the fact that the protagonist is an absolute outcast. And by that, he's pretty much the antithesis to Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. It's like an incel adaptation of that book/movie, where instead of a high-status, attractive, rich Wall Street alpha male who's a psychopath imagining fucked up stuff, we follow a low-testosterone beta-cuck incel with mommy issues who's also a psychopath imagining fucked up stuff. And I don't know many other movies with that sort of incel protagonist.
Babe, there's a midget wanking in there. What's wrong, love? No, seriously!
In general, I feel like inceldom is a crucially under-discussed topic, especially outside the internet, and the little discussion that is being held about it is often extremely superficial and one-sided. Incels are often disregarded as a bunch of whiny idiots on the internet too dumb to take a shower, and let me be clear, that not only shows a lack of empathy towards a group of cripplingly depressed outcasts, it's actually dangerous. It undermines the real threat of incel violence that has already cost many innocent lives. Humancentipede 2 addresses this kind of terror, and I think in that way it's relevant and kind of unique. With that sort of violent movie, it's of course a thin line between valuable art and trash that ultimately everybody has to draw for himself. If you think Humancentipede 2 is the latter, I understand that. But maybe you will change your mind after all as soon as we look at the trilogy as a whole. For that, we have to discuss the last part, the Humancentipede 3 final sequence. Dieter Laser and Lawrence R. Harvey, the protagonist of the second film, return as prison warden Bill Boss and accountant Dwight Butler. Because of the bad financial situation of their prison, Dwight convinces his boss to watch the first two movies. His idea is to combine all prisoners into a giant human centipede to cut costs and restore order. After a bit of hesitation, Bill realizes Dwight's plan and they both present their human centipede to the governor. At first, he's disgusted by it, but he thinks about it and in the end, he celebrates the duo for their bold idea, planning to implement this new prison concept statewide.
This is exactly what America needs. This may even get me elected president.
So over the course of the three films, the human centipede has gone from a concept reminiscent of Nazi experiments to an incel fantasy to an official United States policy. This is the point where we get to that Forbes article. 10 years of the human centipede and its prediction of the alt-right. In it, Luke Y. Thompson comes to the conclusion that the Human Centipede trilogy is the perfect allegory for how alt-right ideas spread through the internet and modern media. According to him, these often start out as edgy jokes like the first part feels.
Barack Obama's lack of American roots could hold him back in the primary.
But gain traction through online forums where young male outcasts, like the protagonist of the second film, flirt with these ideas.
Republicans embraced it, and Donald Trump in particular.
And then they're picked up on and discussed by the mainstream media, which leads to some people actually adapting them, like in the third film.
We don't even know if he's a citizen.
Yeah, if you don't look at the birth certificate, there's almost no evidence there.
Exactly.
Quote, the mainstream media spends the day talking about it, the president, who got elected on some of this stuff, sometimes retweets it, until the next crackpot notion takes root in the online fever swarms. The regurgitation and digestion may be metaphorical, but it's a human centipede all its own. I really like this interpretation because it looks at the trilogy as a whole, and I think that's what you have to do if you want to find any meaning in these films. The fact that the sequels start with the end of the prior film deliberately connects them anus to mouth, like the human centipede. Like one organism you should treat as such. It's emergent. And I think as well that the trilogy is a great allegory for how lunatic ideas become mainstream. Donald Trump is the personification of this phenomenon.
Build that wall. Build that wall.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win.
The article came out in 2019, and I'm sure as hell if it came out today, it would talk about the fact that the former president of the United States, currently running to become president again, believes that the last election was a fraud, without any real basis for this argument. And the really crazy part is that he doesn't need any proof or whatever. A huge part of the population just believes it as well anyway, because the theory of election fraud was perpetuated by him and the mainstream media that backs him.
The head of Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, acknowledged that some of his big stars, commentators specifically, endorsed lies about election fraud being pushed by former President Trump.
The regurgitation and digestion may be metaphorical, but it's a human centipede all its own. I think the human centipede allegory works great on our modern content culture in general. Whether it's Donald Trump or Andrew Tate or Logan Paul, there are all these idiots with dumb but controversial ideas that are great at generating attention. And that's what our media economy is based on. So these people get reported on, clipped, highlighted, ultimately redistributed by others who try to profit off this attention. If you visualize this process with a graph, it looks like a human centipede. Even the human centipede films themselves have been regurgitated by AI summary channels. Millions of people eat up processed, shitty versions of these films without realizing the irony of it all.
More than 800 inmates' asses and mouths were sewn together to make an extra long snake.
Snake? That's how much effort is put into these videos. The regurgitation and digestion may be metaphorical, but it's a human centipede all its own. Now, the question you may ask yourself is, did the creator of these films intend this or any meaning? Well, one thing that is certain is that these films critique right-wing politics and torture. Tom Six, the creator, has said that himself about the third film. The orange suits of the prisoners, the torture methods, and the fact that the prison is named after George W. Bush make it a direct reference to Guantanamo Bay. Another thing we know for sure is that the sequels show how ideas become reality. So if you ask me, mine and Luke Y. Thompson's interpretation isn't a far-fetched. But if you aren't convinced, that's fine too. I would definitely like to hear some more opinions about that. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a nice day.